excuse me. All right, so the data cycle, you can actually see the data cycle there on your Jamboard. And we got, because of how it's set up, it doesn't necessarily look like it has a starting point. Okay, and really, when you come to answering a question, sometimes you start with asking a question, right? But sometimes you start with the data, and then from the data, you then are able to work your way around to where you're like, all right, no, that's not the question that I want to answer. I want to ask a different question than what the data originally was giving us. Okay, so we're going to start with asking a question just because it's going to make it a little bit easier. But the 4 things that we have here are asking a question, considering data, analyzing data, and interpreting the data. Good. All right, I'm going to keep that picture over there for right now, because we're going to use this blank space in a few minutes. Okay, so statistical questions. All right, that's what we're trying to ask statistical questions. They're questions that address variability and can be answered with data. Okay. When we talk about considering the data, we're talking about the actual collection of the data, right? And the collecting of the data may be something that we're doing, right? We may be going and collecting that data and finding the data, but it also may be previous collections of data that other people did with different studies that we're then collecting ourselves. Okay, so it doesn't have to be stuff that we collect individually or as a group. Okay, it could be data that's already been collected that we're going to then look at in a different manner or trying to answer our statistical question. Okay, analyzing data, you're going to be using things like tables, graphs, and summaries of the data, and you're trying to find patterns and relationships. Okay, so when we analyze data, we're going to take that data that was gathered and kind of things that we found. We're going to look at that data. We're going to analyze it with tables, graphs. All right, we're looking for those similarities and differences that we can find that are going to show us some different patterns. Okay, and the last one, interpret data. That is where we are going to take the statistical questions and we're going to try and answer them by referring to our tables, okay, by referring to the graphs or the charts. Okay, so we're going to basically take what we looked at, what we were able to develop in the analyze phase, right? We're going to try and answer that question and interpret it. We're going to figure out, what does that mean? What does all this stuff mean? Okay. And like I said, from there up to the ask question again, there's another arrow right there, okay? Because you may get to a point where either you weren't able to answer your original question and you're like, well, we have this data and I think it's showing something. What statistical question could be relevant to this that we have an interest in? Then you start the data cycle over again. Okay. Now, as we talked about, there's some pretty good overlap with a lot of these things. Okay. So it's not like they're all exactly. A lot of times you're going to be, you can identify, I'm in this step, but I'm quickly moving into this next step. Okay. All right, let's take a look at an example, or let's talk through an example of how we can use the data cycle. All right, so let's say we're just talking as a group and you're just looking at this and I say, all right, I want you guys to develop a question that we can work through the data cycle with. Okay, and the question that we think about is, how old am I? Okay. Right. Now, this is a question, and there's some data involved. If I'm just looking for myself, how old am I? All right. Well, I'm 43 years old. Actually, I'm going to change the question a little bit. Instead of how old am I, actually gonna ask a little different question. Let's say, what month was I born in? I'm not changing the questions. I don't want to tell you guys all. What month was I born in? Okay. Now, again, that has it's a different, the first number was a numerical one. This one's a categorical one because months aren't numbers. I mean, I guess you could say it's a number. Okay. The number of the month, but I was born in September. Okay. So for me, that answer would be one value, September. Okay. For you guys, it would be, could be the same value. You might have been born in September, or it could be a different value. All right. But if I want my statistical question to be, if I say, what month was I born in? There is one value for that, and it's September. Okay. So what we can do is we can actually look at this cycle, right? And I'm actually going to click forward a couple slides. If you guys want to follow along at home. So I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to ask my question, statistical question. What month was I born in? Okay. I move on to the next thing, consider data. Okay. Consider data. So what data do we need to answer this question? Well, what month was I born in? We got the data, September. Okay. That takes care of answering that question, right? As far as what month was I born in. So I'm considering, I collected the data, September, right? Now, in this case, we only had one data value, so it's almost impossible to create something from it. Okay, I could, again, you analyze your data, you're getting tables, you're getting charts. I could make a table, or I could make a bar graph that says months, September, and like do like a 1 for me. All right, I'm the only one if I'm answering the question about just myself. But I don't think that gives us a whole lot of information. All right. So it's hard to analyze something that's only got one data point. All right. So I'm going to go back, and instead of looking at, I'm going to ask a different question, one that's probably a little bit more statistically relevant. All right. So instead of asking about one person, let me go back to our first slide. Okay. So if I go ahead and erase my question here. Instead of how old am I, or what month was I born in? Okay. I'm going to ask a question that's a little bit bigger. Okay. I'm going to ask, what month was everyone in the class born in? Okay. What month was everyone in the class born in? Okay. So here's what I want you guys to do. On the second slide, I want you to either use a Post-it or write it in there. Tell me what month you were born in. Okay. Just give me what month you guys are born in. So the second slide's a blank slide, so there should be plenty of room for you guys to put that in there. You don't even have to tell me your name. Yeah, we've got some groupings here. spring birthdays. Fall, no summer. All right. Okay, you guys can help me out with this. I'm gonna go to the next blank slide, but I want you guys to give me the months and how many we had in each month. Let's go in the order that of the months that show up. So I thought there's a February. Okay. You know what? I better put mine in there too.
Times two.
Oh, that's right. All right. So that's the data collection, right? We basically got our data, we collected our data. Now we're going on, we're going to try and analyze the data. But in order to do that, we're going to put it in a format that makes it a little bit easier to analyze the differences between. Okay. So what I want you guys to do is I'm going to look at this and I'm going to make a table. Right? I'm going to make a table and I'm going to start with, do we have any January birthdays? I think we had a February, right?
Yep, one.
February 1. Okay, we had one birthday in February. How about, let's see, January, March, April? We had 4 in April. Right? May, June, July, August, September. 2 in September. How many in October? And then November. And then none in December, correct? Oh, 1 in December. Okay. All right. Now, this is so again, going through our data cycle, we got our analyze data. Okay, so we're taking the data that we got from the previous slide, we're analyzing it, we're putting it into charts and tables. And a lot of times you may be putting it into a few different things because it may not be obvious in the first thing that you try. Okay, so you might be analyzing it a few different ways. Now I'm putting it in a table format. So again, I think this does a good job. This table does a good job summarizing the question that was initially asked, which was what month is everybody born in? Okay, well, we know right away that they were born in February, April, September, October, November, and December. Okay, we've got the 6 months that people were born in. Now, if we wanted to go back and say, ask another statistical question, what month were the most people born in? We could also use this table to figure that out. Okay, April, more people were born in April. Okay. Now, this is a very simple example, looking at a statistical question and having data to back up the answer to that statistical question. And I think it helps to think of not only the data that you're going to be gathering, but also the different ways that you can analyze that data before you interpret it, which the interpret is kind of the answer. And that's where you take the things that you built and you try to answer your question. Okay. So this is a pretty straightforward example, but again, I think I want to start with something simple before we get a little bit more involved with some deeper questions. Okay. Again, all this page is, if you click on the pointer, it just allows you to, if you wanted to use it as a way to kind of check as you guys go on slide number 4. It's like a spinner where you can kind of work your way around the data cycle. Okay, starting with ask a question, statistical question, consider the data, which is the collecting of the data. analyze the data. That's where you put it in different formats to hopefully tell you can find easier ways to find the answer and find the relationships. And then interpret the data is where you're trying to answer that question based on how you were analyzing. Okay. All right. Slide number 5. Okay. There was a study that was performed, and this was actually done through social media platforms where they asked groups of social media, they said, between these two words, right? So in this case, bro and dude. They basically, what they did is they looked at posts and they tried to figure out which areas used bro more and used dude more. Okay. So the darker the area on the map, the more that word was used. Okay. So the darker that, so looks like bro is pretty, like Texas uses bro a lot. Talk about their friend, right? Dude's kind of a little bit more spread out. So we're looking at this first one. We're talking about just bro and dude. And what I want you guys to think about is I want you to try and think of a statistical question we can ask about this data. Okay. So think about, like, an example would be like, what region of the United States uses neither word? Okay. Or a question about, maybe because there's different topography within the United States. People that are along the coast, what word do they like the most? All right, but I want you guys to see if you can come up with, there's no right or wrong answer to this either, by the way. But there's some blank space on here. See if you guys can come up with one. If you're in your own together, if I only get 3 or 4 questions down there, I'm fine with that. I just want something that we can talk about. We can talk a little bit about the statistical nature of that question and how we can relate it to what we've been given. It can be something really specific. It can be like, which word does the state of Washington like to use? Okay. Or it'd be probably good to have a question where there's going to be some variability, okay, between the two. But the United States is nice because there's some very specific regions within the United States: north, south, western states, mountain states, coastal states. So see if you guys see if you guys can ask one question. Okay, just one. Somebody type one in there. I don't care what it is. This is a little bit different because there's no numeric things we can compare, right? But we have been given something that allows us to kind of work our way. Again, if I said, what stage of the data cycle are we in right now? I would say this is the analyze stage because they've got a graphic here for us to try and interpret, okay? But we don't have a question. So let's start with that analyze phase. Let's go back to the question phase and let's ask a question that we can then use to answer. okay, that we can then interpret this graph with. Okay. Okay, good. All right. These are actually questions that I am curious about as well. Okay. Like what gender voted, I actually am curious about. Because I know they pulled the information out, I think specifically off Twitter. So I'd be curious, I don't know if they could even get that information. What gender was. But these graphs don't give us enough information to answer that question. So we would need to ask a different question. Again, it's not the wrong question, it's just a question that we can't answer with this data. Could the results change over time? I'm sure they could. This is a snapshot of a specific time, so we can't go off a different time. What word does the Midwest does the Midwest states use? Between these two graphs, we can take a look at that. We can look at Midwestern states, which are right in here. And I would say dude is probably more prevalent based on the fact that it's darker in the Midwest. Okay, in the dude area. Okay, there's a pretty big wide open area that would be considered Midwest that is not colored. Whereas here, there's only a very small area. Most of it's that pink to darker red color. Yes, go. How many people in each region voted? And that's another thing. We don't know that either. This data specifically just it's a more general. So while that's not a question we can answer with this data, it's a good question. And I would say probably in this situation, we'd be looking more at regions, okay, asking about regional questions. We could ask a more global question, like which word seems to be used more in the United States. Okay, you could compare the two areas, like the darker regions. I don't know, it's hard to tell if I were to ask that question, because I know that this is a heavy dark region right here over Texas and the states surrounding Texas. That dark area is probably close in the same area that this dark area is, it's just more spread out. And I would say the pink areas, there's a bigger pink, like darker pink area in between the light pink and darker red. There's a bigger area of that over here. If I were going to interpret this, I'd probably say dude is used more than bro. Okay. Based on this data. Okay. The other slide was just another one where they're comparing buddy and fella. Okay. I would say if you're comparing dude to any of these, I'm thinking dude might be more. But again, I'm from the Midwest. Maybe that's because in the Midwest, I just use dude more. All right. But between these two, I'd say, again, statistical questions. We're asking, what's a statistical question? Something that we can look at the data with and we can answer, we can analyze, and then we can interpret it from the data. So again, we're starting with the analyze phase. We're going to go back and ask a question. My question, this one might be, again, I like the Midwest one. Which word is used more in the Midwest? And in this case, buddy, pretty heavily used in the Midwestern area. Yeah, there's no light pink in this area, actually. Right? So we're gonna be moving, again, as we move forward into lesson 5, we're gonna be doing some more things with statistical questions. We're gonna talk about statistical questions and how we can focus on questions that we can analyze, okay? And that because statistical questions have variability. Okay. Not just a question where you get one answer, but questions where you get multiple answers. Things that you can compare, analyze, right, and then you can interpret from how you analyze them with your tables and graphs. Yes, ma'am. Of course it is. We're done for the day. All right. So don't have anything for you guys to work on right now. So you guys are good for the next 8 minutes. Tomorrow I will have something for you guys to complete with our next lesson. But wanted a good introduction of the data cycle today for you guys.